Boundaries serve to protect our time and energy. They preserve our self-respect and they help us to communicate our needs and give us some much needed peace in our lives. Welcome to The PA is In, the show created by PAs for PAs, where codependency with your supervising physician is a thing of the past, optimal team practice is the future, and physician associate has taken the place of physician assistant as the professional title of choice. I'm Tracy Bingaman, and I'm obsessed with redefining what success as a PA looks like and what it feels like. Here you'll find the mindset shifts, systems, and processes I use to escape healthcare burnout and integrate my work into my life. Work-life balance is a myth, and an integrated life where you thrive professionally, not a balancing act, is the goal here. My mission is to help you to grow into a unicorn PA who loves their job, has abundant energy, time to spare, and work-optional financial freedom. The PA is in. One of my very favorite things about being a podcaster is crossing paths with other incredible podcasters. If you love this show, especially when I share about my experience with healthcare burnout and recovery, you're going to want to check out the podcast, Burnout, What I've Learned So Far, hosted by my friend Meg Letty. Meg is a former CT surgery PA turned advocate for healthcare provider wellness. Turn in to hear how she recovered from burnout and integrated well-being into her life to create a life of dreams, not nightmares. Add Burnout, What I Have Learned So Far with Meg Letty to your podcast queue to start your journey to wellness and healing today. I believe deep in my heart that boundary setting should be a clinical skill. We should learn more about it in school. It's necessary for living a life that feels good, and it's crucial to thriving in clinical practice. With healthcare being this increasingly customer service, survey focused, pay for patient satisfaction world that we are living in right now, being able to set boundaries that are effective is vital in having a career that is long and sustainable in healthcare, where you don't sacrifice yourself in order to take care of your patients. So, today on The PA is In, we are going to talk about boundaries, the anatomy of a healthy boundary. I'm going to give you some examples of unhealthy boundaries and ones that will lead you feeling disappointed because they were not really effective or clearly communicated at all. So boundaries are limits, policies, and guidelines of how we run our lives. They dictate what we say yes to and when we reply with no. Boundaries are so important for our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. I have learned a lot about boundaries in the nearly 3 years since I burned out. I'm not saying that boundaries alone would have or could have saved me from crashing and burning when I did, but they certainly would have slowed the process down. When I was in that situation where work was asking me to do more and more, and my census was growing, and the hospitals I was rounding at were increasing and increasing and increasing, having a mechanism for building and clearly communicating and enforcing healthy boundaries would definitely have made a difference. For that reason, I like to think about boundaries as one of those modifiable risk factors. There's something that are within our control that we can use to define what is okay and what is definitely not okay as a part of our life and our work and our burdens and our interactions. This applies to interactions with patients and colleagues, leaders within our organization, our own administrators, friends, and family members. Boundaries serve to protect our time and energy. They preserve our self-respect and they help us to communicate our needs and give us some much needed peace in our lives. Not having boundaries or having boundaries that are porous, or poorly communicated can lead us to overcommitment. It can contribute to our stress, burnout, and we can end up with a life that doesn't have a drop of fulfillment in it. Not yet convinced as to why you need boundaries in your life? Well, studies have shown that boundaries lead to healthy relationships, decreased stress, and an increase in your self-worth, all of which we could use as a part of our life.
Now, the healthcare system in general and your administrative team want you to feel like you are nothing but a cog in a wheel, one piece of a bigger machine that, quite frankly, doesn't need you. Healthcare and the healthcare system leaves us feeling like we are replaceable, disposable, nothing but a human resource that can be replaced at the drop of a hat. I'm here to tell you otherwise. And boundaries will help you to preserve your individuality and remind those around you of who you are and the value that you add to your organization. But they also serve as a reminder to those people in your life that you are not willing to be taken advantage of. Because sometimes this pressure that the system puts on us makes us feel like if we create healthy boundaries, if we enforce those boundaries, that we are going to be replaced because there's someone else who will work without boundaries. Now, before we get into the anatomy of healthy boundaries, I want to talk about unhealthy or ineffective boundaries. Now, I'm willing to bet that you've made a series of declarations in your own mind that represent unhealthy or ineffective boundaries in your life. These are boundaries that may exist only in your mind, the ones that weren't clearly communicated to others, boundaries that you decided were true without putting in systems to support them and to help them to succeed. So here's an example of an imaginary, unhealthy, and essentially non existent boundaries. So you decide out of the blue, after a particularly frustrating month where you've been charting several hours in the evenings at home, multiple nights a week, that your time matters and that you're no longer willing to donate this time to work. And therefore, you're not going to chart outside of work hours. So you come to this decision rashly. You put a stake in the ground and you say, no more charting at home. And this might come after your partner, spouse, or family give you pushback about the amount of time that you're spending working when normally you'd be spending time with your family. So maybe you're sitting there on the couch typing away on your keyboard and you're missing out on game night or movie night or just being able to relax and engage with your family. So you tell no one about this plan, right? This boundary only exists inside your mind. You say, I'm not going to chart outside of work hours. You don't tell your scheduler, your nurse, your clinical staff, your office manager, or any of your administrators. And you don't tell your spouse and your kids. You're in your mind saying, like, I'm going to show them. I'm going to suddenly start being so engaged at home. I'm never going to chart outside of work. And off you go. So the problem with this boundary, one, it's not sustainable. And there's nothing that has changed in your workflow or your schedule or your charting efficiency to support this boundary becoming a reality. You didn't adjust the amount of patients that you're seeing in a day or work on improving that charting efficiency so you can actually get your notes done as you go throughout the day. So, by not communicating this to your office manager or team, no changes were made to set you up in success in implementing this boundary. This boundary doesn't exist outside of your mind, and therefore it really doesn't exist at all. In my talk about burnout, I share that about boundaries and about how boundaries are so critically important on not burning out or recovering from burnout. And I often say that if there's someone in your group or office that does have healthy boundaries, you all hate her. Am I right? Having healthy boundaries in a culture where self sacrifice is the norm may, in fact, be unpopular at first. But you could actually be the one to pave the way and to show others what it's like to live with clearly communicated, effective boundaries.
If you only take one sheet of paper to your next negotiation, let it be the PA Pay One Sheet. It's a tool designed to walk you through setting up the ideal outcomes, assessing the situation you are negotiating in, and it even includes a reminder of which negotiation skills you can use. Stop what you are doing. Download the one sheet, print it out, fill it out, and literally bring it to the table with you when you are negotiating next. It's designed specifically to work in healthcare settings wherever you are. You can use the PA one sheet to get the best deal, the biggest raise, and to help your confidence walking into your next negotiation. Head to www.tracybingaman.com/one, that's ONE, to download your free copy of the PA Pay one sheet and start prepping for your next negotiation today. It's linked in the show notes, but in case you missed it, it's at www.tracybingaman.com/ONE.
Now, I want to talk about and zero in further from boundaries in general and from that example of an unclear, ineffective boundary to actually focusing on what healthy boundaries are. Healthy boundaries are those that align with your values, meet your needs, help you to create limits on time and the amount of work that you're doing. Healthy boundaries are clearly communicated to those around you who it affects and are enforced by you after they are implemented and communicated. These boundaries can be clear, direct, and communicated in a way that is polite and kind. You can enforce them calmly, without apology, and without feeling guilty. Because we are medical and we love a good anatomy lesson, I'm going to break down these 5 anatomical parts of a healthy boundary. So, when you think about a healthy boundary, in your mind or in the mind of the boundary is clearly thought out. The spine represents the fact that this boundary is clearly aligned with your core values. The heart is that this boundary meets your needs and helps to protect your peace. The mouth is that this boundary is clearly communicated to those around you that it affects and that it might burden or influence in some way. And the hands are that these boundaries are held closely and enforced firmly. So I want to break down each of these aspects of the healthy boundary and sort of dive into this. Now, if you have boundaries in your life that you're like, yeah, I wish I could have boundaries, or I wish that I didn't feel guilty, or I wish that I could communicate these things to those around me, I want you to take each of your boundaries and sort of hold them up against these 5 anatomical parts of a boundary. Thought out, aligned with your values, meets your needs and protects your peace, is clearly communicated, held closely, and enforced firmly. And this is going to help you to identify where those boundaries have fallen short or where they have not really been clearly communicated or put out into the world as something that you stand for. Now, doing that can make you a little hesitant because sometimes you look around and you're like, everyone has poor boundaries around here, but that doesn't mean that that is the way that you have to live your life. So, first, thought out. So, the boundary that I gave you as an example of an ineffective boundary was not one that was clearly thought out. It was just one where you said, I'm not going to do this anymore, damn it. And then you tried to enforce it without really having a system. So, boundaries that are healthy and effective are clearly thought out. You think about them not in a vacuum and how it only affects you, but rather how it affects the whole team. So, I'll give you an example. When I worked inpatient, the pager would switch from me as the rounder during the day to the call person at a certain time, let's say 4 p.m., because I can't honestly off the top of my head remember exactly what time it switched. So I'm rounding, I'm doing notes, my name is attached to this patient. The nurses or anyone else in the care team is calling me if they have questions for the urology team. And then the switch flips. It's 4 p.m. and now the call person is on call. Now, by the book, that person is supposed to be answering all of those questions. Now, in practice, the internal medicine team knew that I was rounding that day. The nurses had already been communicating with me. The patient's family maybe had the ability to contact me or had been speaking to me earlier that day. None of those people knew that at 4 p.m. it switched to the pager. So the way we had it in Tiger Text, the role would switch over and that conversation would go to the call person. But oftentimes these conversations were sort of happening in side channels, right? They were contacting me directly, they were calling me directly. And instead of going through the role that we had built, that would have clearly shown them, hey, Tracy's not on call tonight, don't call her after hours, they would contact me anyway. So if I was going to, and here's the thing, I would answer them. So I would answer them regularly after 4 p.m. I didn't have a policy where I said, hey, It's after 4 o'clock. Even though I know this patient, even though I was rounding on them during the day, I'm home, right? So I'm no longer on the clock. I'm no longer getting paid to be on call. I'm not covering tonight. You need to contact so and so through the role. Here's the way that you can get in touch with them. So the other thing about boundaries, and this is just like a little side note, it's easier to build them on the front end than it is to erect them after you've sort of letting people hang out on your lawn and suddenly say, like, get off my lawn, here's a boundary, stay on the other side of it. That's a whole other topic for a whole other day. But if I was going to say, hey, at 4 o'clock, I'm truly going to log off. I'm going to close down. I'm going to sign all my notes. I'm going to send the email with anything pertinent to the team. And I'm going to get in the car by 4:30 or 5 or whatever that deadline is. In order to do that, I would need to stop answering questions at some point, right? I would need to stop taking those phone calls. I would need to stop getting back to people because there was someone on call responsible for that. If I was going to do that, I would have to think of a plan. Okay, the person who's on call is going to start getting more calls. I should make sure that the email goes out as I'm going to stop covering these calls so that they have the information about this patient and what's going on with them and what the plan is with them today, tomorrow, discharge planning, all of those things, so that that person is equipped to answer the question. So that's thought out when it comes to creating a boundary. It needs to be clearly thought out. It's hard to make boundaries when you're in the heat of the moment. Boundaries almost never include the words like always, never, ever again, right? They're not these absolutes. They're really, hey, I've been charting after hours. I really want to keep the charting within the bounds of my day. So I need to block an admin appointment or cut off my last patient before the end of the day so that I have time to chart and get out on time. It doesn't ever happen in a vacuum. And this thought out is thinking, hey, what do I need? And also, how does that affect the rest of the practice, the rest of the workflow, the rest of the providers, my clinical staff, all of those things to make sure that you are thinking about it clearly. So if I'm going to build a boundary at home, like I'm not going to make lunches anymore, which I did one time years ago. I would have to clearly say, like, well, someone's going to make them, right? Are my kids old enough and competent enough to make their lunches? If they're not, is my husband willing to take on this task and take this over? Because you can build a boundary, but the work doesn't stop at that fence that you build. So you have to have some sort of a system and think, how is this going to affect others in the group? How is this going to be implemented? Is this going to be effective? So that's the mind part of a boundary. Is it thought out? Did you think about it from other people's perspective? Did you think about the downstream effects? Did you think about how it's going to affect patients and when they get their results or when you call them back or returning phone calls? All of those things have to be thought about. Now, none of those things should serve as a deterrent to you building that boundary, but you do need to take them into account when you're getting ready to build that boundary. Now, spine of the boundary, the spine of the boundary, the thing I literally just stood up straighter as I said that. Everyone check their posture. Is the boundary aligned with your values? Those things in your life that matter most to you, that you hold deeply important, is the boundary helping you to have more of those in your life? Now, if you're thinking, I am so busy out here living my life, I can't even remember, I don't even know what my closely held core values are, I want you to go to tracybingaman.com/values. It's linked in the show notes, and download a guide. It's this 3-step process that you go through to figure out what matters most in your life. And then you can build boundaries that help you to have more of that in your life. Because sometimes we want to make a boundary just because, right? Because we feel like, oh, this is just too much. But the question is that boundary actually helping you to live a life that is more in alignment with your values? Is that boundary helping you to get home on time to your family, if that's what matters most to you? Is that boundary helping you to not work outside of work, if that's what matters most to you? Now, heart meets your needs. And I think this is something that is ever changing, right? So does this boundary meet your needs? And that may be, hey, during this season, I need to not work during this time. I need to be able to, be present with my phone turned off, not checking emails, not on call during this specific night of the week or this specific time frame. This is something that requires ongoing self-reflection and checking in with yourself. How am I doing? How does work feel? How does life feel? What do I need in this season? What help do I need from other people? What tasks do I need to pick up or set down? Mouth, clearly communicated. This is where a lot of boundaries fall short, right? So we do the mind, we think it out, we think about how it's going to affect others. We do the spine, we make sure that it's aligned with our values. We check in with our heart. Does it meet my needs during this season? Does it meet my family's needs? Does it help me to move towards those values? Does it protect my physical, mental wellness and my peace? And then we get to clearly communicated and we chicken out, right? Because clearly communicated means that you have to tell someone that you're no longer willing to do it the way that you've always done it, or that you're no longer willing to do a new thing that they're asking you to do. Clearly communicated means that you have shared that this boundary exists with everyone who it affects, and that you did that confidently and without apology and without feeling guilty, because your needs matter. And having a career in medicine that is sustainable means that you sometimes have to communicate that you're not able or not willing to do things that everyone else has so far been doing. It has to be communicated to people on your team, to your support staff, to your upline or your administration above you. Sometimes we have to communicate it to our family, and we have to say, hey, there's this thing happening at work where we're going live on outpatient Epic, and it's going to take more of my time, and I'm going to have to go in early a couple of days, or I may end up staying late, or I have to go to this training, which means I need so-and-so to pick up this person. If you don't communicate this, the boundary does not exist. And boundaries that only exist in your mind lead to frustration and resentment. I'm going to say that again in case you're multitasking. Come on back. Boundaries that exist only in your mind are going to lead you to feel frustrated and resentful, because people aren't going to respect these boundaries because they don't know that they exist. And if they don't know that they exist, you're robbing them of the opportunity to support you in something that really matters, and something that you've spent time thinking about and making sure it aligns with your values and helping you to meet your needs and protect your peace during this season. But if you don't communicate that to them, they have absolutely no idea that it exists at all. And the hands part of this boundary is that you're holding it closely and enforcing it firmly. So you can do the work and think about it and make sure that it's in alignment and that it's protecting your peace, and you can clearly communicate it with people, and then they can still ignore it. So this held closely and enforced firmly means that you don't forget about it, right? That you keep it top of mind, and also that you remind other people when they accidentally or on purpose try to overstep this boundary, because that's going to happen. You're going to get a new office manager. People are going to forget that on Wednesdays you have to get out on time to get your kids, and they're going to book a late patient, and you're going to have to say to them, that doesn't work for me. This person needs to be rescheduled. This appointment needs to be moved. My template needs to be blocked in the future so that this doesn't happen again. And what you end up doing with held closely and enforced firmly boundaries is that you'll start to create systems that make it harder for people to violate those boundaries. The other thing about firmly enforcing boundaries over time is that people get used to your no, right? They'll stop asking you, right? Because they know she can't work nights on the weekends because her husband is a firefighter, right? She doesn't do this, right? They'll know because you'll have trained them to know by clearly enforcing that boundary again and again and again, and being consistent with your no, and not being apologetic and not having to even give a reason. Just say Wednesdays after 4 don't work for me, period. That is the end of the sentence, right? You don't have to justify it like, because my youngest daughter has ballet and it overlaps with my kids' karate. And so Dan takes the kids to karate, but I have to be out for about Wednesday afternoons after 4. I'm not available, period. You don't have to feel guilt. You don't have to justify it. You can just draw a line and then communicate that line and then enforce that line when people try to get you to walk over it or they try to walk over your line. I know that this sounds like I'm sort of making it say like, oh, just do this thing. we're not great at it. And I do think that building boundaries is just like any other skill that you learned clinically, right? In Skills Lab, you learned how to start IVs and give injections and do all of these different things. And in order to do that, you had to understand the process, learn the process, practice the process, and do the process. Now, I once heard a thought leader, my friend Jenna Kutcher, share that boundaries are not designed to keep others out of your life. Boundaries are meant to keep you in it. They are meant to make sure that what you value sits in a place of importance in your life, and that you and your core values and the things that are most aligned and most important to you are central to your life. When you live on the margins, in the scraps, in the little pieces of time of your life, it doesn't feel great. It leads to burnout and stress. It doesn't leave you feeling fulfilled at all. Building boundaries is not erecting these brick walls to keep people out. It actually means building fences that you can see through. But these fences do serve to protect you and your health and your wellness and your relationships. Boundaries are so important. I think it's nearly impossible to have a sustainable career in medicine without clear, healthy boundaries that are in alignment with your values, that are communicated to those that you love, and that you hold firmly and enforce clearly and kindly and confidently with people in your life. Stop feeling guilty about wanting to create a container for work. Boundaries will help work to stay at work. They will help you to be mentally present outside of work. And it's not just work and life that need boundaries, but this is a very clear example of how work will just ask for more. One more add-on, one more day, one more hour, one more patient, one more night shift. And unless you have boundaries that say, hey, I don't do more than X shifts per this time period, they give you this reason, this automatic no, because you've decided on what is reasonable for you, and you have decided what's reasonable for your health and sanity and peace during this season. That is all for today. This PA is out.
Congratulations, you've just joined an awesome club. By listening to a full episode of The PA is In, you are officially on the Unicorn PA team. Welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episode of the show. The life of your dreams exists on the other side of taking action. Keep making small shifts and keep getting better. Your life will improve, your career will soar, and you will have the confidence you need to create your own success. I will see you in the next episode. This PA is out.